the United Nations in general, and in fact the entire African continent and the entire world have been impressed by the reforms that were initiated by Prime Minister Abiy last year. And there's tremendous interest in supporting those reforms to ensure that they succeed, because they're very progressive, they create democratic space, they create opportunities for peace, they create rapprochement with several countries in the region that historically were in conflict. I think the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea is a particular example. So by and large, we're very optimistic and we're very positive as the United Nations. But we also recognize that there's tremendous work that needs to be done to make sure that the reforms succeed, and that there are challenges. And I think one of the unintended consequences of the reform is the increase in incidences of communal conflict, which has resulted in a very high number of internally displaced people. So by and large, we are very optimistic. There are positive reforms and we want to support them, but we recognize the challenges and we want to work with the government to overcome these challenges. Generally, across the board, the opening up of the democratic space, I think that's very important. Historically, the space wasn't, it was restricted. Probably one of the most dramatic accomplishments is bringing parity within cabinet, gender parity. There are not that many countries in the world that have accomplished that. You know, bringing 50% women, 50% men, as it were. And I also have to emphasize that these are not people that were appointed because they were women, but because they are people of substance in their own right. They are well educated, they are capable, and they're competent. You know, that's probably the most important reason why they were identified to fill these positions. But it means that opportunities have been increased for women in this respect. The appointment of the Supreme Court Justice, you know, the appointment of the first woman president, you know. So all these things are a tremendous accomplishment in a very short space of time, but they're very significant, they're very powerful, they send a powerful message to the world, but also to young people in Ethiopia as well, you know, that the country is on the move and it's changing and they must step forward and play a constructive and positive role. Historically, this was as a result of droughts or floods, particularly in the lowlands, you know, and we needed to respond to save lives and also to save livelihoods. But more recently, we've experienced a new type of internally displaced people that are displaced as a result of conflict, you know, between communities as well, internally displaced people. We're very concerned about that, and we're working with the government to try and do two things. First, to try and make sure that those that are internally displaced receive the support that they require in terms of food, in terms of medication, and if they are children, in terms of education as well. But we also, and the government is providing leadership in this respect through NDRMC. But we also want to work with the government to find long-term solutions to the problem of internally displaced people, you know, and working with the people themselves that are affected. You know, what are their preferences? What do they like to do? What do they like to see happen? You know, but also working within the government policy of supporting people to return to their homes. You know, we have no objection to that in principle. I think all in our discussions, what we highlight with the government is that there are certain international human rights principles that must be observed in returning people to their place of displacement. These include that you cannot force them. They have to be willing to return. And secondly, that we have to make sure that the conditions allow for a successful return. You know, it's pointless for them to go back and then run away again because they feel insecure or they're not quite ready. So we have to prepare for successful return, we have to make sure that the conditions are there and they're right. I think one of the concerns is that a lot of people feel insecure, about their areas of displacement. And that's where the government has a responsibility to provide, law and order, to provide security in those areas, and to make sure that perpetrators of violence are brought to court, and the law is applied. These are the things that build confidence in the general population, that the situation is returning to normal. So we work with the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance, OCHA, and with the government. Minister of Peace is our major interlocutor in this respect, and also NDRIMC and the Deputy Prime Minister's Office to provide support to make sure that those affected, we save lives, and also provide them with the capacity to recover, and carry on with their lives. We save livelihoods as well. And we continue to engage with the government in this respect. The UN has a very strong presence in Ethiopia. It's a very important country to the United Nations. We have 29 United Nations agencies working on development issues in Ethiopia. But we're also working on humanitarian issues in Ethiopia. It's a very old relationship established over many years going forward. Now, in terms of development, the basis of our work are the several Ethiopian development plans, the GTP, the current is GTP2. I think next year the government will probably be working on the third GTP3, which is the National Development Strategy, the National Development Plan, and that is the one that is then used by the United Nations Development System in Ethiopia to define their own strategic areas of support based on their mandates, because we have all different mandates as the United Nations, and based on their technical capacities as well. We can't do everything, but there are certain areas where we're particularly good at. And based on our capacity to bring in good value, and support and resources going forward. So the priorities, in fact, are related to consolidation of peace, for example, consolidation of governance. That's a priority area for the United Nations. I think what we've done also as the United Nations was to try and revisit our priorities in the context of the new dispensation, so that our priorities are relevant, to the reforms that are going on here. And by and large, we really confirm that our priorities remain appropriate and relevant to the GTP priorities. And probably the areas that we can strengthen in terms of delivering results going forward. But by and large, our priorities are quite relevant to the national development priorities. We're very concerned about employment generation, growing the economy, but grow the economy in such a way that it generates jobs for the large numbers of young people that enter the labor force every year. I think that's very significant, because the experience of Ethiopia is that it's not just about growth, because the country experienced very significant growth over the last 10, 15 years. In fact, one of the highest growth rates in the world, not just on the African continent. But we also realize that that growth has not generated enough jobs to absorb the large numbers of young people that enter the labor force every year. So we have to go beyond growth. We have to look at what type of growth, can we support, can we work with. We need the type of growth that will generate jobs, But we also understand that, in fact, with technology and improvements in productivity, growth alone cannot meet all the job requirements of the population. So we have to encourage job growth and employment, but also have to encourage entrepreneurship among young people. encourage them to use, for example, new technologies like digital technologies to work from home, to create jobs for themselves, to create small business for themselves. But you have to create the infrastructure that is required to support that. You have to create the opportunities for financing to support entrepreneurship. And you have to come up with new products, financial products and financial services that promote job creation and that promote entrepreneurship development for young people. But it is, I'm aware that it's a priority of the government, to generate jobs and create opportunities for employment. That's why they've got this massive program of industrial estates, which will, in several strategic areas, strategic towns, designed precisely to encourage industrialization, but also to encourage job creation in the process. We really have excellent partnership with the government. We get the support that we require to help the government address some of the challenges that they face. And the new dispensation provides an incredible historical opportunity to transform this country for the good, to open up the political spaces. All those that were fighting against previous governments have been encouraged to come, and be encouraged also to operate within the new political environment. And I've met some of them, and they feel that the conditions, of course, are much better. There's no need for them to get into the bush and carry up arms, but to try and participate politically and make a positive difference. No, I'm not saying it's perfect. Okay, let's be very clear. There's work that continues that needs to be done going forward, but this is the thrust, and it's a positive thrust, and in our view, it has to be supported.